The dust swirled around Wilhelmina Wright's boots as she stood in front of her little bookshop on Main Street in Downieville, California, reading the eviction notice for the third time that morning, her hands trembling so badly the paper rattled like leaves in a storm. It was the summer of 1878, and the gold rush had long since faded from these Sierra Nevada foothills, leaving behind a town that clung to survival through sheer stubbornness. Wilhelmina had opened her bookshop 2 years ago with the small inheritance her mother left her, determined to bring culture and learning to a place that desperately needed both. She had scraped by month after month, selling books to miners who wanted to learn to read, to lonely prospectors who craved stories of faraway places, to women who hungered for knowledge beyond cooking and sewing. But now Theodore Chambers, the banker who owned half the buildings on Main Street, wanted triple the rent. He claimed property values were rising, though everyone knew he just wanted her space for another saloon. $300 by the end of the month, or she would lose everything. Wilhelmina pressed her forehead against the shop's front window, looking at the shelves she had built herself, the reading corner with its mismatched chairs, the small desk where she had spent countless hours keeping her meager accounts. 23 years old, and she was about to lose the only thing that gave her life meaning. "Miss Wright?" She turned to find Jackson Turner standing a respectful distance away, his worn hat in his hands. Jackson was a cowboy who worked the cattle drives between Downieville and Sacramento, though work had been scarce lately. He came into her shop once a week, always on Thursdays, to browse the books he could not afford to buy. Wilhelmina had started lending them to him for free 6 months ago, touched by the hunger for learning in his dark eyes. "Mr. Turner." She quickly folded the notice and tucked it into her apron pocket, trying to compose herself. "I saw you from across the street. You look troubled." He was 26, tall and lean from years of hard work, with calloused hands that handled books as gently as if they were newborn foals. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held a kindness that made Wilhelmina's heart catch sometimes when she was not careful. "It is nothing I cannot handle," she lied, forcing brightness into her voice. "Did you come to return your book?" "Not exactly." Jackson shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Could we go inside?" She unlocked the shop door and let him follow her into the cool interior. The familiar smell of paper and leather bindings usually comforted her, but today it felt like saying goodbye to a dying friend. Jackson placed a worn copy of Great Expectations on the counter and cleared his throat. "That notice Chambers gave you," he began. "I heard talk around town. $300 is robbery." Wilhelmina's cheeks flushed. "You should not concern yourself with my troubles, Mr. Turner. I will find a way." "How?" His directness surprised her. "Forgive me for being blunt, Miss Wright, but I have been keeping track. You barely make $30 in a good month. Where are you going to get $300 in 3 weeks? She turned away from him, pretending to straighten books that did not need straightening. "I have been writing to my aunt in San Francisco. She might be able to help." "You have an aunt in San Francisco?" The silence stretched between them. Wilhelmina felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of Jackson Turner, no matter how kind his eyes were. "No," she whispered finally. "I do not have an aunt anywhere. My mother was my only family, and she has been gone for 3 years. She heard him move closer, felt him standing just behind her. "I have something that might help," he said quietly. "My horse ranger. He is worth at least $350, maybe $400 to the right buyer. I could sell him." Wilhelmina spun around. "What? No, absolutely not. That horse is your livelihood." "How would you work the cattle drives without him?" "I would figure something out." Jackson's jaw was set in that stubborn way she had seen when he wrestled with a particularly difficult passage in a book. "I could walk, find other work, maybe hire on at the lumber mill." "You are a cowboy, not a mill worker, and those drives pay 3 times what the mill does." She shook her head vehemently. "I cannot let you do this. It is not your choice to let me or not let me. It is my horse to sell." He placed his hands on the counter between them, and she saw the white scars across his knuckles, evidence of a hard life lived in the saddle. "Miss Wright, Wilhelmina, if I may be so bold, this bookshop matters, not just to you. It matters to this whole town, even if most folks are too ignorant to see it." "It is just books," she said weakly. "No, it is not just books. It is hope. It is education. It is the future." He spoke with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When I first came to your shop, I could barely read beyond a few words. My parents died when I was 8, and I have been working ever since. You have been patient with me, teaching me without making me feel stupid. Do you know what you have given me? A whole world I never knew existed." "Mr. Turner, Jackson. Please call me Jackson. Jackson." His name felt strange and intimate on her tongue. "I am deeply moved by what you are saying, but I cannot accept such a sacrifice. Ranger is not just your transportation. He is your companion. I have seen the way you care for him. And I have seen the way you care for your books, for your customers, for this dream you have built." He reached across the counter and took her hand, a gesture so unexpected that she did not pull away. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "You deserve to keep building. I can walk, but you should not have to give up everything you have worked for just because some greedy banker wants more money." Wilhelmina looked down at their joined hands. No man had ever touched her with such gentle respect. No one had ever believed in her dream the way Jackson seemed to. But the price was too high. "I cannot let you do this," she said, but her voice wavered. "Then let me ask you something else." He squeezed her hand gently. "Do you have another option? Any way to raise $300 in 3 weeks?" She wanted to lie to protect his sacrifice with false hope, but his eyes demanded honesty. "No," she admitted. "I have been trying to think of something, anything, but I have nothing left to sell. I already sold my mother's jewelry to buy inventory last winter. Then let me do this. Not as charity, as an investment in the future of this town, in education, in something better than saloons and gambling halls." He paused, then added more softly, "In you." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond business. Wilhelmina felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She had noticed Jackson, of course she had. A woman would have to be blind not to see the strong lines of his face, the gentle way he moved, the intelligence that shone through his rough exterior. But she had assumed a cowboy like him would never look twice at a bookish woman like her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Jackson released her hand and stepped back, and she immediately missed his warmth. He picked up his hat and turned it in his hands, not meeting her eyes. "Because," he said finally, "in all the places I have been, all the camps and towns and dusty trails, I have never found anywhere that felt like it could be home. Until I walked into this bookshop. Until I met you." Before she could respond, he placed his hat on his head and walked to the door. "I am taking Ranger to Sacramento tomorrow. There is a horse trader there named Mulligan who will give me a fair price. I will be back in 4 days with the money." "Jackson, wait." Wilhelmina hurried after him, but he was already outside, untying Ranger from the hitching post. The horse was a beautiful sorrel gelding with a white blaze, clearly well cared for and deeply loved. "Please, you cannot do this. There must be another way." He swung into the saddle with the easy grace of a man born to ride. Looking down at her, his expression was both determined and tender. "There is no other way, and we both know it. Let me do this, Wilhelmina. Let me help you save what matters. But what about what matters to you? Ranger matters to you. Yes, he does. Jackson reached down to pat the horse's neck. But some things matter more. You will understand that someday, I hope. He rode off before she could argue further, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her heart in turmoil. Around her, Downieville went about its business. Wagons rattled past. Someone called out a greeting she barely heard. The afternoon sun beat down on her shoulders, but she felt cold all the way through. That night, Wilhelmina lay awake in the small room she rented above the dress shop, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Jackson Turner. She had been so focused on her books and her shop that she had not allowed herself to think about companionship, about love. Her mother had raised her to be independent, to rely on no one but herself. But was there strength in accepting help when it was freely given? Was there honor in letting someone make a sacrifice they wanted to make? She thought about the way Jackson handled her books, the questions he asked about the stories, the slow smile that transformed his serious face when he finally understood a difficult concept. She thought about the gentleness in his touch, the conviction in his voice when he spoke about her shop mattering. And she thought about him walking, alone, without the horse that had been his constant companion. Also, she could keep her dream alive. The next morning, Wilhelmina opened her shop with renewed determination. If Jackson was willing to sacrifice for her dream, then she would make sure that sacrifice meant something. She organized her inventory, noting which books sold well and which gathered dust. She made plans for expanding her lending library, for holding reading lessons for children, for becoming truly indispensable to the community. But as the day wore on, her resolve began to crack. Every time she looked out the window, she half expected to see Jackson riding past on Ranger. The streets seemed emptier without them. Martha Chen, who ran the restaurant next door, came in around midday. She was one of the few Chinese residents left in Downieville after the violence and discrimination had driven most away. She and Wilhelmina had formed a quiet friendship, two women fighting to maintain their independence in a town that did not always appreciate them. I heard what Jackson Turner is doing, Martha said without preamble. She never wasted words. That is true love. It is not love, Wilhelmina protested. It is kindness, generosity, perhaps. No man sells his horse for generosity. Martha picked up a book and examined it without really seeing it. My late husband once sold his father's watch to buy medicine when I was sick. He said some things you cannot replace, but some things you cannot live without. I was the thing he could not live without. Jackson barely knows me. Does he? Martha set down the book and looked at Wilhelmina with dark, knowing eyes. He comes here every week. He stays for hours sometimes. I see him through my window, watching this shop when you are inside. A man does not watch a shop, he watches a woman. Wilhelmina felt heat rise to her cheeks. Even if what you say is true, what can I do? He has already left for Sacramento. You can decide what you want, Martha said simply. And you can be ready to tell him when he comes back. The words stayed with Wilhelmina long after Martha left. What did she want? She had spent so long focused on survival, on keeping her shop alive, that she had not allowed herself to want anything else. But now, in the quiet moments between customers, she found herself imagining Jackson's smile. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the calluses on his hands that spoke of honest work. The respect he showed her, never once suggesting that a woman had no business running a bookshop. She wanted him to come back, not just with the money, but to come back to her. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Wilhelmina threw herself into work, but her mind kept wandering to the road leading out of town. She imagined Jackson walking that road, leading Ranger to the horse trader. handing over the reins, accepting money for the animal he loved, walking back alone. The thought made her chest ache. On the fourth day, she woke before dawn and dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself it was not for Jackson, but she knew she was lying. She arranged her dark hair 3 times before she was satisfied, then laughed at herself for being so foolish. The shop felt different that morning, charged with anticipation. Every time the door opened, her heart leaped, but it was always someone else. Mrs. Peterson looking for a primer for her son. Old Bill Henderson browsing the dime novels. A traveling salesman trying to sell her inventory she could not afford. The sun was past its zenith when Jackson finally walked through the door. He looked exhausted, his boots dusty from miles of walking, his face shadowed with something that might have been grief. But he smiled when he saw her, and the smile reached his eyes. "Miss Wright," he said formally, then caught himself. "Wilhelmina." "Jackson." She wanted to rush to him but forced herself to stay behind the counter, hands gripping the wood to keep them steady. "You walked from Sacramento," most of the way, caught a ride on a wagon for the last stretch. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily. $400. Mulligan drove a hard bargain, but Ranger was worth it. He set the pouch on the counter between them. Wilhelmina stared at it, this tangible proof of his sacrifice. Her throat tightened. "How did he seem?" she asked quietly. "Ranger, was he well treated?" Jackson's expression softened. "Mulligan is rough around the edges, but he knows horses. He has a good stable. He promised to find Ranger a home with someone who will appreciate him." He paused. "That is what I kept telling myself on the walk back, that Ranger will have a good life. That this mattered more. Did you believe it? Sometimes." His honesty cut through her. "Mostly when I thought about you keeping this place, about the good you do here, then it seemed worth it." Wilhelmina picked up the pouch, feeling the weight of coins and bills. "This is too much," she said, but her voice broke. "You have given too much." "You can pay me back," Jackson said. "Eventually, when the shop is doing better, I am not worried about it." "How will you work?" "The cattle drives, I will figure something out. The lumber mill is hiring. Or I can do odd jobs around town. I have been thinking maybe it is time to put down roots somewhere anyway." He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. "I was hoping maybe I could stay in Downieville for a while, if that is acceptable to you." "Acceptable." Wilhelmina came around the counter, the pouch clutched in her hands. "Jackson, you have just made an enormous sacrifice for me, for my dream. How could your presence be anything but acceptable? I did not want you to feel obligated." He looked down at his boots. "I know I am just a cowboy. Not educated like you. Not refined. But I thought maybe if I was in town more regularly we could." He stopped, seeming to lose his nerve. "We could what?" Wilhelmina's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Jackson raised his eyes to hers, and she saw vulnerability there and hope and something that made her breath catch. "I thought maybe you could teach me more, about reading, about books, and I could help you around the shop, fix things, move heavy boxes, whatever you need. And maybe, if I am not being too presumptuous, we could get to know each other better. You want to court me?" It was not a question. "Yes." The word came out rough, laden with feeling. "I know I should have more to offer. A man courting a woman should have prospects, a future. Right now all I have is 2 strong hands and a willingness to work. But Wilhelmina, from the first time I walked into this shop, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. The way you light up when you talk about books. Your patience when you teach. Your determination to make something beautiful in a rough town. I have never met anyone like you." Wilhelmina set the pouch down on a nearby shelf. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From the enormity of what she was feeling, what she was about to say. "Jackson Turner, You have more to offer than any man I have ever met. You have kindness and integrity. You have a hunger to learn and grow. You have just made the most selfless gesture anyone has ever made for me." She stepped closer to him, close enough to smell the dust of the road on his clothes, the faint scent of leather and sunshine. "If you want to court me, I would be honored." The smile that broke across his face was like dawn breaking over the mountains. "Truly, truly." She found herself smiling back, feeling lighter than she had in months. "But Jackson, I want you to know something. This sacrifice you made, it means everything to me. But you mean more. If there had been any other way, any possibility at all, I would have taken it rather than let you sell Ranger." "I know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and took her hand. This time she squeezed back, feeling the rightness of their joined hands. "But there was no other way, and I would make the same choice again." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with new understanding. The bookshop around them felt different now, charged with possibility. This place that had been just Wilhelmina's dream was becoming something shared. "So," Jackson said finally, a touch of humor entering his voice, "when does courting officially begin? I must admit I have not done much of it." "Neither have I," Wilhelmina admitted with a laugh. "Perhaps we can figure it out together. I would like that." He released her hand reluctantly. "I should go find a place to stay. And I need to check at the lumber mill about work. But may I come back tomorrow? Maybe take you to dinner at Martha's restaurant." "I would like that very much." After Jackson left, Wilhelmina locked the door and allowed herself a moment to simply feel. Joy, relief, excitement, and beneath it all, a growing affection for the man who had walked into her life and changed everything. She took the pouch of money to her small safe and locked it away, then sat at her desk and allowed herself to cry, releasing all the fear and tension of the past weeks. When Martha came by that evening to check on her, she found Wilhelmina red-eyed but smiling. "He did it," Wilhelmina said simply. "Of course he did." Martha sat down across from her. "And what did you say to him?" "I said yes, to courting, to getting to know each other better." Wilhelmina pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. "Martha, I have never felt this way before. Is it too soon? Am I being foolish?" "You are being human," Martha said gently. "Love does not follow a schedule. Sometimes it grows slowly. Sometimes it strikes like lightning. There is no right or wrong, only what you feel." "I feel like my whole world has shifted," Wilhelmina confessed. "This morning I was alone with my books and my worries. Tonight I have a future I never dared imagine." "Then imagine it now," Martha advised, "and see where it takes you." The next morning, Wilhelmina woke with a sense of purpose she had not felt in a long time. She dressed carefully again, unable to help herself, and opened the shop with her heart singing. At noon, Jackson arrived freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. His hair was still damp and combed back from his face, and Wilhelmina thought she had never seen a more handsome man. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. She locked up the shop and took his arm, feeling the strength of him beneath the cotton fabric. They walked together to Martha's restaurant, and Wilhelmina was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. Jackson Turner and Wilhelmina Wright, walking together. It would be all over town by evening. Let them talk, she thought recklessly. Let them see that I have found something precious. Martha seated them at a corner table and brought them bowls of fragrant stew without asking what they wanted. She caught Wilhelmina's eye and winked before disappearing back into the kitchen. "This is nice," Jackson said, looking around the simple restaurant with its mismatched furniture and handwritten menu. "I have eaten here a few times, but it feels different today." "Everything feels different today," Wilhelmina agreed. She watched him eat, noting the careful way he used his utensils, the consideration he showed in every movement. "Did you find work at the mill?" "I start tomorrow," he confirmed. "The pay is not what I made on the drives, but it is steady, and I will be here, not gone for weeks at a time." He met her eyes. "That matters more to me now. Because of me. Because of you," he agreed without hesitation. "Because of the possibility of us." They talked through the meal, and Wilhelmina discovered that conversation with Jackson was easy and natural. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera, about the years of drifting from job to job. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about her mother's determination to educate her daughter despite limited means, about the grief of losing her and the determination to honor her memory by building something lasting. "Your mother would be proud of you," Jackson said softly. "The shop, what you have accomplished, it is remarkable." "I hope so." Wilhelmina traced the rim of her bowl with one finger. "Sometimes I wonder if I am being selfish, if I should have done something more practical." "There is nothing more practical than knowledge," Jackson countered. "Every person who learns to read, every child who discovers stories, every man or woman who finds comfort or wisdom in a book, they are all proof that what you do matters." His faith in her was humbling. "You sound like a scholar," she teased gently. "I am trying." His expression turned serious. "Wilhelmina, I want you to know something. I may not have much formal education, but I am committed to learning, to bettering myself, not just for me, but because I want to be someone worthy of you." "Jackson, you are already worthy." She reached across the table and took his hand, not caring who saw. "You have always been worthy. Education does not determine a person's value, character does, and you have more character than most people I have met." His throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said roughly. "That means more than you know." After their meal, they walked back to the bookshop slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end. Jackson told her about his plans to find a room at the boarding house, about his hopes to save money from his mill wages. "I will pay you back," he promised. "Every dollar. It might take time, but I will do it." "There is no rush," Wilhelmina assured him. "Use your wages for yourself, get settled. We can discuss repayment later." They stopped in front of the shop, and Jackson reluctantly released her arm. "Thank you for dinner, for the conversation, for everything. Thank you for walking me back." Wilhelmina felt suddenly shy, aware that they were standing close together on the street where anyone could see. "Will I see you tomorrow? May I stop by after work? I know you will be closing up around then. Maybe we could walk together again." "I would like that." Jackson tipped his hat and walked away, and Wilhelmina watched him go with a smile on her face. Inside the shop, she moved through the afternoon in a daze of happiness. Customers came and went. She made sales and gave recommendations, but part of her mind was always on Jackson. On the way he looked at her, on the feel of his hand in hers, on the future that was slowly taking shape between them. That evening, she paid Theodore Chambers his blood money, counting out $300 with a satisfaction that felt like victory. The banker looked disappointed to receive it, clearly hoping she would fail and give him an excuse to evict her. "The rent will be the same next month," he said coldly. "I expect you to keep up with payments." "I will," Wilhelmina said with confidence she truly felt. With the pressure of the immediate crisis gone, she could focus on building her business properly. "You will have your money." As spring turned to summer, a pattern developed. Jackson worked at the mill during the day, hard labor that left him exhausted but brought in steady wages. In the evenings, he came to the bookshop, helping Wilhelmina with tasks that required strength. Moving shelves, repairing the roof where it leaked, building new display tables. Then they would sit together, and Wilhelmina would teach him, watching with delight as his reading improved, as he tackled more difficult books, as his understanding deepened. But it was more than lessons. They talked about everything, dreams and fears, past sorrows and future hopes. They learned each other's habits and quirks. Wilhelmina discovered that Jackson had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He discovered that she sang softly to herself when she worked, little melodies she was not even aware of. The town of Downieville watched their courtship with interest. Some approved, seeing Jackson as a hard-working man who had proven his devotion. Others gossiped, suggesting that Wilhelmina should set her sights higher than a former cowboy working at the mill. But the couple paid little attention to either praise or criticism. They were too wrapped up in each other. Martha observed their growing attachment with satisfaction. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon," she told Wilhelmina one afternoon. "And I look at him the same way," Wilhelmina admitted. "Is that foolish? We have only been courting for 2 months." "Time does not measure love," Martha said wisely. "I knew my husband for 3 weeks before we married. We had 20 good years together before the fever took him. I would not trade those years for anything, and I do not regret moving quickly." "I am not sure I am ready for marriage," Wilhelmina said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if it was true. The thought of Jackson as her husband did not frighten her. It filled her with warmth. "You will know when you are ready," Martha assured her. "And so will he." The town was growing busier as summer advanced. New prospectors arrived, chasing rumors of gold that had mostly played out years ago. A family of homesteaders passed through, heading for the valleys beyond the mountains. And with the increased traffic came increased business for the bookshop. Wilhelmina found herself placing larger orders, expanding her inventory, hiring a part-time assistant so she could focus on the lending library and reading lessons she had started for local children. Jackson watched these developments with pride. "You are thriving," he said one evening as they walked along the creek that ran through town. They had fallen into the habit of evening walks, times when they could talk privately away from curious eyes. "We are thriving," Wilhelmina corrected. "Your sacrifice made this possible, Jackson. I do not forget that. I am glad I did it." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "Funny thing, though, I thought I would miss Ranger more. I do miss him, some days more than others, but I have gained so much more than I lost." "Have you?" She moved closer, emboldened by the privacy of their location and the deepening twilight. "You know I have." He turned to her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and intense. "Wilhelmina, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful that I made the choice I did, that I found the courage to help you." "It was an incredibly courageous thing to do," she agreed softly. "Not many men would have made that sacrifice." "Not for just anyone," he said. "But for you, it was not even a difficult choice." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I knew even then that you were special, that you were worth any price. Jackson." His name came out as barely a whisper. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words rushed out, honest and unguarded. "I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible and careful, but I cannot help it. You are everything I never knew I wanted." His face transformed, joy and relief and love all mingling together. "Thank God," he breathed. "Because I am already in love with you. I have been for weeks, maybe from the beginning. I was just afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, afraid you would think I was using the sacrifice as leverage." "Never," Wilhelmina said fiercely. "I would never think that of you." "Can I kiss you?" The question was tentative, respectful, so perfectly Jackson that it made her heart swell. "Yes." She tilted her face up to his. "Please." His kiss was gentle, reverent, a soft press of lips that sent warmth cascading through her entire body. Wilhelmina's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they parted, both were breathless. "That was my first kiss," Wilhelmina admitted, feeling heat in her cheeks. "Mine too," Jackson confessed. "Was it all right?" "It was perfect." She smiled up at him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his expression. "Everything about this is perfect." They walked back to town hand in hand, no longer caring who saw. That night, Wilhelmina lay in her small room and traced her lips with her fingers, remembering the kiss, remembering the way Jackson had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She was in love. Deeply, thoroughly, irrevocably in love. The next morning brought unexpected trouble. Wilhelmina arrived at the shop to find the front window broken, glass scattered across the floor inside. Her heart plummeted. She carefully unlocked the door and stepped inside, crunching over glass, and saw that several books had been pulled from shelves and thrown around. It was not a thorough destruction, more like someone had wanted to send a message. That message was made clear by the note pinned to her desk with a knife. "Women do not belong in business. Close this shop or next time will be worse." Wilhelmina's hands shook as she held the note. She looked around at the damage, at the violated space that had been her sanctuary, and felt anger rise up to burn away her fear. How dare someone do this? How dare they threaten her and her dream? She was sweeping up glass when Jackson arrived, earlier than usual. One look at his face told her he had heard the news. Someone must have seen the damage and told him at the mill. "Are you hurt?" He rushed to her, taking the broom from her hands and examining her for injuries. "I am fine. I was not here when it happened. It must have been during the night." She showed him the note, and she watched his expression darken. "You have any idea who did this? Someone who does not think women should own businesses. That narrows it down to about half the town." Wilhelmina tried for levity, but her voice cracked. "Oh, Jackson, what if they come back? What if they do worse? They will not." His voice was steel. "I am not going to let anyone hurt you or your shop. You cannot guard me every hour of every day. Watch me." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Wilhelmina, you are not alone anymore. We will figure this out together. We will protect this place, and we will find out who did this." Sheriff Davis arrived shortly after, a weathered man in his 50s who had kept the peace in Downieville for 20 years. He examined the damage, read the note, and sighed heavily. "I wish I could say this surprises me," he said, "but there are still folks in this town who have backward ideas about women's place. I will ask around, see if anyone saw anything. In the meantime, I suggest you be careful." "That is your advice. Be careful." Wilhelmina heard the sharpness in her own voice. "Someone broke into my shop and threatened me, and you want me to be careful. Miss Wright, I understand your frustration, but without witnesses or evidence, my hands are tied." Davis looked genuinely apologetic. "I will do what I can, but you need to take precautions. Maybe close early for a while. Vary your routine." After the sheriff left, Wilhelmina sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I will not let them drive me out," she said. "I will not give up everything I have worked for because someone is too cowardly to even sign their threats." "No one expects you to give up," Jackson said. He had finished sweeping the glass and was now examining the broken window. "But we do need to be smart. I am going to talk to some people. There are folks in this town who believe in what you do. Maybe we can organize some kind of watch, people taking turns keeping an eye on the shop at night." "You think people would do that?" "I know they would." He came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You have touched more lives than you realize. The children you have taught to read, the minors you have helped write letters to their families, the women who come here for the lending library because they cannot afford to buy books. They all value what you have created." His faith gave her strength. "All right, let us organize a watch, and I am going to write an article for the newspaper about the importance of literacy and education. I will not hide. I will not be intimidated." "That is my brave girl." Jackson pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We will get through this." True to his word, Jackson spent the rest of the day talking to people around town. By evening, he had organized a rotating schedule of volunteers willing to keep watch over the bookshop at night. Martha volunteered immediately. So did several of Wilhelmina's regular customers, the mothers whose children attended her reading lessons, even a few of the miners from the camps outside town. "You see," Jackson said as they reviewed the schedule together, "people care." Wilhelmina felt tears prick her eyes. "I had no idea so many people valued the shop." "They value you," Jackson corrected gently. "You have made a difference here, Wilhelmina. That is worth protecting." That night, Jackson took the first watch himself, refusing to let anyone else take the risk. Wilhelmina wanted to stay with him, but he insisted she needed rest. She went to her room but could not sleep, imagining Jackson sitting alone outside her shop, watching for trouble. The next few days passed tensely. There were no more incidents, but Wilhelmina felt constantly on edge, jumping at sudden noises, watching everyone who entered her shop with suspicion. Jackson stayed close, taking on extra shifts at the mill so he could be there when she opened in the morning and closed at night. Then Martha came to the shop with news. "I heard something," she said without preamble. "Two men at my restaurant drinking too much and talking too loud. One of them mentioned the bookshop, said it was a shame the woman did not take the hint. Did you recognize them?" Wilhelmina asked, her heart pounding. "One of them works for Theodore Chambers. I think his name is Sykes." Wilhelmina and Martha looked at each other, understanding passing between them. "Chambers," Wilhelmina said slowly. "He wanted to evict me. When I paid the rent, he looked disappointed." "You think he is behind this?" Jackson had arrived during their conversation, and his expression was dangerous. "You think the banker hired someone to vandalize your shop? It makes sense," Martha said. "If Wilhelmina gets frightened enough to leave, he gets the property back. He can raise the rent even higher for the next tenant." "We need proof," Wilhelmina said, though anger burned in her chest. "We cannot accuse the most powerful man in town without evidence." Jackson's jaw was tight. "Then we will get evidence." Over the next week they watched and waited. Jackson made it known around town that he was investigating the vandalism. Sheriff Davis, though limited in what he could do officially, provided advice and support. And slowly, the truth emerged. It turned out that Sykes, Chambers's hired muscle, had gotten drunk one night and boasted to the wrong person about the job he had done. Word reached the sheriff, and Davis brought Sykes in for questioning. Faced with the possibility of jail time, Sykes confessed. Chambers had indeed paid him to vandalize the shop, hoping to frighten Wilhelmina into leaving. The scandal rocked Downieville. A banker using intimidation and vandalism to evict a tenant was beyond the pale, even in a rough mining town. Chambers found himself facing criminal charges and social ostracism. His bank began losing customers. His reputation was ruined. For Wilhelmina, the vindication was sweet, but the trauma was real. She had nightmares about the broken glass, about threats in the dark. Jackson stayed close, a steady presence that helped her feel safe again. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," she confessed to him one night as they sat in the shop after closing. "What if they had come when I was here? What if they had done more than break a window?" But they did not. Jackson pulled her close, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. "You are safe, the shop is safe, Chambers will face justice. Because of you," she looked up at him. "You organized the watch, you investigated, you protected me. We protected each other," he corrected. That is what people do when they love each other. The word hung between them, acknowledged now, no longer hidden. Love. They loved each other. Jackson Turner, what are your intentions toward me? Wilhelmina asked with a small smile. My intentions. He pulled back slightly to look at her properly. I intend to court you properly for as long as you will have me. I intend to keep working hard, saving money, building a future. And someday, when the time is right, I intend to ask you to be my wife. Wilhelmina's breath caught. Someday. I want to be able to offer you something, he said. Right now, I have almost nothing. I am still paying off debts from before, still getting established at the mill. I do not want to ask you to marry me when all I can give you is hard work and hope. Hard work and hope sound perfect to me. Wilhelmina took his hands. Jackson, I do not need you to be wealthy. I do not need grand gestures. You have already given me the grandest gesture possible when you sold Ranger to save my shop. What I need is you, your partnership, your love. You have all of that, he promised. You have had it for months now. Then perhaps someday does not need to be so far away. She felt bold saying it, but also certain. I know my own heart, Jackson. I know that I want to build a life with you. Why should we wait? Because I want to do this right, he said, but she could hear the longing in his voice. I want to have something to offer you besides empty hands. Your hands are not empty. She raised one of his hands to her lips and kissed the scarred knuckles. They are full of strength and skill and tenderness. They are the hands of a good man who made a sacrifice for the woman he barely knew because he believed in her dream. Those are the hands I want holding mine for the rest of my life. Jackson's eyes were suspiciously bright. Wilhelmina Wright, you have a way with words. It is one of my few talents, she smiled. So what do you say? Shall we think about a future that is sooner rather than later? Yes, he said simply. Yes, let us think about that. The summer heat gave way to the cooler days of early autumn. The leaves on the aspen trees turned gold, and the air took on a crispness that spoke of winter to come. Wilhelmina's bookshop continued to thrive. The publicity from the Chambers scandal had actually brought her more customers, people who admired her courage in standing up to intimidation. She hired a full-time assistant, a young woman named Grace who had a love of books almost as fierce as Wilhelmina's own. This gave Wilhelmina more freedom, time to develop her reading programs and expand the lending library. She even started hosting literary discussions once a week, gatherings where people could come and talk about books they had read. Jackson thrived too. He proved himself at the lumber mill, earning the respect of his co-workers and a small raise in wages. He moved from the boarding house to a small cabin on the edge of town, a place with 2 rooms and a wood stove, nothing fancy but his own space. He spent his evenings making it comfortable, building furniture, imagining what it could become. One October evening, as they walked along the creek in the golden light of sunset, Jackson stopped and turned to face Wilhelmina. I have something to ask you, he said, and she heard the nervousness in his voice. What is it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Wilhelmina's heart began to race. I know I said I wanted to wait, to have more to offer you, but every day that passes, I am more certain that you are the only future I want. I love you, Wilhelmina. I love your courage and your intelligence and your kind heart. I love the way you sing when you work and the way you laugh at my jokes even when they are not that funny. I love the life we are building together. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. It is not much, he said. I saved for 3 months to buy it. But it is real gold, and the stone reminded me of your eyes. Wilhelmina Wright, will you marry me? Tears spilled down Wilhelmina's cheeks, happy tears that blurred her vision. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, Jackson, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that was different from all their other kisses, deeper and more passionate, a promise of things to come. When they finally parted, both were breathless and grinning. "When?" Jackson asked. "When should we marry?" "Soon." Wilhelmina looked down at the ring on her finger, at the way it caught the last rays of sunlight. "I do not want a long engagement. Why should we wait when we both know what we want? December," he suggested. "That gives us 2 months to plan, to make arrangements." "December sounds perfect." She kissed him again, unable to help herself. "Mrs. Wilhelmina Turner, I like the sound of that. I love the sound of that." Jackson held her close, and they stood by the creek as the sun set and the stars began to emerge, 2 people who had found each other against all odds. The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation. Martha insisted on hosting the wedding supper at her restaurant. Grace offered to decorate the bookshop for the ceremony, since Wilhelmina could not imagine getting married anywhere else. Friends and customers contributed what they could: a wedding cake, flowers from someone's hothouse, a borrowed dress that fit Wilhelmina perfectly after some alterations. Jackson worked on making his cabin ready for Wilhelmina to move into. He built a larger bed, installed more shelves for her books, added curtains to the windows. Every evening he showed her his progress, and every evening she fell more in love with the care he put into preparing their home. They talked about their future, about their dreams. Jackson wanted to eventually buy a small piece of land outside town, maybe raise a few horses. Wilhelmina wanted to expand the bookshop, perhaps open a real library that the whole community could use. They talked about children, both agreeing they wanted a family but were in no rush. "I want to enjoy being married to you first," Jackson said. "I want to have time for just us before we become parents." "That sounds wise," Wilhelmina agreed. Though she loved children and looked forward to motherhood someday, she also wanted time to savor the newness of marriage, to learn Jackson in all the intimate ways that would now be possible. December arrived with snow and cold winds that swept down from the mountains. The town of Downieville transformed into something out of a fairy tale, white and glittering and beautiful. Wilhelmina watched the snow fall and felt her excitement building. In just a few more days, she would be Jackson's wife. The night before the wedding, Martha insisted that Wilhelmina stay with her rather than in her room above the dress shop. "It is tradition," Martha said firmly. "The bride should not see the groom before the ceremony." So Wilhelmina spent her last night as a single woman in Martha's comfortable room behind the restaurant, listening to her friends' stories about her own wedding day, about the years of marriage that followed. "You are making the right choice," Martha said. "Jackson is a good man. The 2 of you will be happy." "I know we will." Wilhelmina felt peaceful, certain. This was right. Jackson was right. Their future together was right. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue above the snow-covered town. Wilhelmina dressed carefully in the borrowed gown, a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk. Martha helped her arrange her hair and fastened a wreath of winter greenery on her head. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes wet with tears, "like a winter queen." The ceremony was set for midday. As noon approached, Wilhelmina walked from Martha's restaurant to her bookshop, which had been transformed. Grace had strung garlands of evergreen across the shelves, placed candles on every surface, arranged chairs to create an aisle down the center of the space. The room glowed with warm light, and the familiar smell of books mixed with pine and candle wax. Friends and customers filled the chairs, people who had supported Wilhelmina through the hard times and celebrated with her through the good. Sheriff Davis was there, and Grace, and the mothers from the reading lessons with their children. Even a few of the miners had cleaned up and come to town for the occasion, and at the front of the makeshift aisle stood Jackson, looking more handsome than Wilhelmina had ever seen him. He wore a new suit, clearly purchased for the occasion, and his hair was neatly combed, but it was his expression that took her breath away. He looked at her as she walked toward him like she was a miracle, like he could not quite believe his fortune in winning her heart. The ceremony itself was brief, conducted by a traveling preacher who happened to be in town, but the vows were heartfelt. When Jackson promised to love and cherish Wilhelmina for the rest of his days, his voice was thick with emotion. When Wilhelmina promised the same, she looked into his eyes and meant every word with her whole soul. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Jackson cupped Wilhelmina's face in his hands and kissed her softly, reverently, and the gathered crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Wilhelmina heard Grace crying happy tears, heard Martha calling out congratulations in Chinese and English both. But mostly she was aware of Jackson, of the solid reality of him, of the knowledge that he was hers now and she was his. The wedding supper at Martha's restaurant was joyful and chaotic. People crowded around tables, passing dishes of food, toasting the new couple with whatever they had in their glasses. Jackson's hand stayed clasped with Wilhelmina's throughout the meal, both of them too happy to let go of each other even for a moment. As evening fell, Jackson and Wilhelmina slipped away from the celebration, walking through the snowy streets to the cabin that was now their home. Jackson carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," Wilhelmina replied, looking around at the space that Jackson had prepared for her. Books on shelves, curtains on windows, a fire crackling in the stove, and the door to the bedroom standing open, promising intimacy and discovery. They spent their first night as husband and wife, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and tenderness that had characterized their courtship. Jackson was gentle, always checking to make sure Wilhelmina was comfortable, that he was not moving too fast. And Wilhelmina discovered a passion in herself she had not known existed, a hunger for closeness that Jackson matched with his own desire. Afterward, lying tangled together under quilts, Wilhelmina traced idle patterns on Jackson's chest and felt complete in a way she never had before. "Happy?" Jackson asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Wilhelmina admitted. "You have given me everything, Jackson. Love, partnership, security. I do not know how I got so lucky. I am the lucky one." He tightened his arms around her. "I gave up a horse and gained a wife, a home, a purpose. That seems like a tremendous bargain to me. You never regret selling Ranger?" It was a question she had not asked in months, afraid of the answer. "Sometimes I think about him," Jackson said honestly. "Wonder where he is, if he is being treated well. But regret? No. I made the right choice, Wilhelmina. I saved your shop, and in doing so I found my future, our future." Winter deepened, and the new couple settled into married life. Mornings they woke together, sharing coffee and quiet conversation before Jackson headed to the mill and Wilhelmina went to open the bookshop. Evenings they spent together in their cabin, reading aloud to each other, talking about their days, planning for the future. Wilhelmina discovered that she loved being married, loved the intimacy and companionship, loved having someone to share all the small moments of life. Jackson was an attentive husband, always asking about her day, helping with household tasks, making her feel valued and cherished. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of new growth and new possibilities, Wilhelmina began to feel different. She was tired more often, and certain smells made her nauseous. When Martha noticed her turning green at the smell of frying bacon, She raised an eyebrow knowingly. "When was your last monthly?" Martha asked bluntly. Wilhelmina paused, thinking. She had been so busy with the wedding and settling into married life that she had not paid attention. "I am late," she realized. "Very late." "I thought so." Martha smiled. "You are with child, I think." The words sent a jolt through Wilhelmina. A baby. She and Jackson had talked about wanting children eventually, but they had expected to have more time. Still, as the initial shock faded, excitement took its place. A child. Their child. That evening she told Jackson the news. He was sitting by the fire, reading one of the adventure novels he had grown fond of when she came to kneel beside his chair. "I have something to tell you," she said, and he immediately set down his book, hearing the importance in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine." "Better than fine." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Jackson, I think we are going to have a baby." She watched the emotions cross his face: surprise, wonder, joy. "A baby," he repeated, as if he needed to hear the words again to believe them. "We are going to be parents." "It appears so." Wilhelmina found herself grinning. "I know we talked about waiting, but this is wonderful." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "You are having my baby. We are starting a family. Are you happy about it?" She asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Wilhelmina, I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled." He pulled back to look at her. "We are going to be parents. I am going to be a father." They sat together by the fire, talking about the changes ahead, about names and nurseries and all the ways their lives would transform. Jackson was already making plans to expand the cabin, to add another room for the baby. Wilhelmina thought about how she would balance motherhood with running the shop, but she felt confident they would figure it out together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Wilhelmina continued working at the shop through the spring and summer, though she gave Grace more responsibilities as she grew heavier and more tired. Jackson was protective without being overbearing, always checking to make sure she was not overdoing it, but respecting her independence. On a warm day in early August, Wilhelmina's labor began. Martha came to help, along with a midwife from town, and Jackson waited anxiously in the main room of the cabin while the women worked. It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next morning, but finally Wilhelmina heard the cry of her newborn child. "A boy," Martha announced, bringing the baby to show Jackson before returning to help Wilhelmina. A healthy, beautiful boy. When Jackson was finally allowed into the bedroom, he came to sit beside Wilhelmina on the bed, looking at the tiny bundle in her arms with awe. "He is perfect," Jackson whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. His son immediately gripped his finger and Jackson's face lit up. "Look at that, he is strong already." "What should we name him?" Wilhelmina asked, though they had discussed names for months without settling on anything. Jackson was quiet for a moment, studying his son's face. "What about William? After your father?" Wilhelmina felt tears prick her eyes. Her father had died when she was very young, but her mother had spoken of him often, keeping his memory alive. "William Turner," she said softly. "I love that. William Jackson Turner. William Jackson," Jackson repeated, and Wilhelmina heard the emotion in his voice. "Our son." They sat together, the new family of 3, as the morning light streamed through the windows. Wilhelmina looked at her husband holding their son and felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This man who had walked into her life less than 2 years ago, who had sacrificed for her, who had stood by her through difficulties and joys, was now the father of her child. They had built this together, this family, this future. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, but he still needed constant care. Wilhelmina and Jackson took turns walking him when he was fussy, changing him, soothing him back to sleep. Grace ran the bookshop more and more as Wilhelmina focused on motherhood, and Wilhelmina was grateful for her capable assistant. Jackson was a devoted father. He came home from the mill every day eager to hold his son, to play with him as William grew more alert and responsive. He sang to the baby in his rough voice, made faces that elicited giggles, walked the floor for hours when William was teething. "You are wonderful with him," Wilhelmina said one evening, watching Jackson rock their son to sleep. "I want to be the kind of father I never had," Jackson said quietly. "Someone present, someone he can count on. He is lucky to have you. We both are." As William's first birthday approached, Wilhelmina looked back on the past few years with amazement. From the desperate woman facing eviction to the wife and mother she was now, the transformation was dramatic. And all of it had started with Jackson's sacrifice, with his willingness to sell his horse to save her shop. They threw a small party for William's birthday, inviting the friends who had become like family. Martha, Grace, Sheriff Davis, the mothers from the reading group. Watching William demolish a small cake with his chubby hands, Wilhelmina felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was what happiness looked like. This messy, noisy, love-filled life. That night, after William was asleep and the house was clean again, Wilhelmina and Jackson sat together on their porch enjoying the warm summer evening. "You ever think about those early days?" Wilhelmina asked. "When you first came into the shop?" "All the time," Jackson admitted. "I think about how close we came to never knowing each other. If I had not walked through that door, if I had not been bold enough to offer to help, if you had not been selfless enough to sell Ranger." Wilhelmina took his hand. "That sacrifice changed everything, Jackson. You changed everything." "We changed each other," he said. "You taught me that I could be more than just a drifter working odd jobs. You showed me that I could learn, could grow, could build something lasting. And you showed me that I did not have to face everything alone," Wilhelmina said. "That accepting help and partnership did not make me weak. That love was worth the risk." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, thinking about all they had built together. The bookshop was thriving, now established as an important part of Downieville's community. Jackson had been promoted at the mill and was saving money toward his dream of buying land. William was healthy and happy. Their marriage was strong, built on mutual respect and deep love. "I want more children," Jackson said suddenly. "Not right away, but eventually. I want William to have siblings." "I would like that too." Wilhelmina leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think we make beautiful babies together." He laughed and kissed the top of her head. "I think we make a beautiful life together." The years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. A second child came when William was 3, a daughter they named Marion after Jackson's mother. Then, 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Jackson building additional rooms and Wilhelmina filling them with love and laughter. The bookshop continued to prosper. Grace eventually married and started her own family, but she continued working part-time. Wilhelmina hired another assistant and expanded her lending library until it became a true community resource. She started literacy programs for adults, hosted book clubs and discussion groups, and became known throughout the region as an advocate for education. Jackson finally saved enough to buy a small parcel of land outside town, where he started raising horses again. It was not the life of a cowboy he had left behind, but something better, a stable business he could build while still being present for his family. He never forgot Ranger, but he came to see that selling his beloved horse had opened doors to a richer, fuller life than he had ever imagined possible. Theodore Chambers left town in disgrace after his trial, his bank taken over by new management. Sykes served time in jail and emerged a changed man, who apologized to Wilhelmina publicly and found work as a ranch hand far from Downieville. Justice had been served, and the town moved forward. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Wilhelmina back to the creek where he had proposed. The children were staying with Martha for the evening, giving the couple a rare chance to be alone together. 10 years, Jackson said, skipping a stone across the water just as he had done that long-ago evening. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Wilhelmina agreed. She was 33 now and Jackson was 36. They had both changed, marked by years and children and life, but the core of what they felt for each other remained constant. I love you more now than I did then. I did not think that was possible, Jackson teased, but his eyes were serious. But I know what you mean. Every year we are together, every challenge we face and overcome, every joy we share, it deepens what is between us. I never properly thanked you, Wilhelmina said, for what you did. Selling Ranger to save the shop. It was the most selfless act anyone has ever done for me. You have thanked me every day for 10 years, Jackson said gently. By building a life with me, by giving me a family, by loving me. I got so much more than I gave up, Wilhelmina. I hope you know that. I do know, but I wanted to tell you anyway. She moved into his arms, fitting there as naturally as she always had. You said you could walk, that I deserved to keep building, and you were right. But what we built together is so much better than anything I could have built alone. I feel the same way. He held her close, this woman who had become his entire world. You are my greatest adventure, Wilhelmina Turner, better than any trail I rode, any place I have been. You are home. They stood by the creek as the sun set, much as they had 10 years before, but now they carried with them the weight and wonder of a decade of marriage. 3 children sleeping safely in Martha's care. A thriving business and a growing horse ranch. A community that respected them and friends who loved them. A future full of promise. As they walked back to town hand in hand, Wilhelmina thought about how far they had come from that desperate day when she had stood outside her shop, reading an eviction notice. How a single act of courage and kindness had changed the trajectory of both their lives. How love, real and lasting and true, had grown from that first sacrifice. The bookshop was dark as they passed it, but Wilhelmina could see the shapes of books on shelves through the window. Her dream, saved by a cowboy who believed in her before he even really knew her, who saw value in education and culture, even though he had little of either at the time, who had been willing to walk so she could keep building, and build they had. A family, a business, a life rich in all the ways that mattered. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About how grateful I am, Wilhelmina said simply. For you, for everything we have created together. For the fact that you walked into my shop that day and decided I was worth helping. You were always worth helping, Jackson said. You just needed someone to see it, and I was lucky enough to be that someone. They collected their children from Martha, all 3 drowsy and cranky at being woken. Thomas, the baby at 3 years old, cried when they bundled him into his coat. Marion, 5 and already showing signs of her mother's love of learning, peppered them with questions about their evening. And William, now 8, walked ahead with the serious expression he often wore, trying to be helpful. Back at their home, they put the children to bed with the comfortable routine of experienced parents. Stories and kisses, tucked blankets and whispered goodnights. Then finally, Wilhelmina and Jackson were alone in their own room, tired but content. Another successful day, Jackson said, pulling her close in their bed. Another successful 10 years, Wilhelmina corrected, and hopefully many more to come. At least 50 more, Jackson said. I plan to grow very old with you, Mrs. Turner. That sounds perfect to me. As Wilhelmina drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the path that had brought her here. The struggles and triumphs, the fears overcome and dreams realized. She thought about a young cowboy walking into her shop, seeing her distress, and making a choice that would change everything. She thought about a horse named Ranger, wherever he was now, and hoped he was well. His loss had been great, but the love that had grown from that sacrifice was immeasurable. In the morning, life would continue. The bookshop would open. Jackson would work with his horses. The children would learn and play and grow. And through it all, Wilhelmina and Jackson would walk together, building the future one day at a time, just as they had been doing for 10 years. The Wild West around them was changing. The rough edges of Downieville were smoothing out as the town matured. More families arrived, more businesses opened, civilization encroached on the wilderness. But some things remained constant: love, family, commitment, sacrifice. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up a full life. William grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books as much as his mother. Marion proved to have her father's way with horses and spent hours at the ranch. Thomas was the wild one, adventurous and fearless, always getting into scrapes that his parents handled with patience and humor. The bookshop became a Downieville institution, one that Wilhelmina eventually expanded into a full public library with the support of the town council. She hired staff to help run it while she balanced her duties as a mother and wife. Grace's children grew up alongside the Turner children, and the two families remained close. Jackson's horse ranch prospered, becoming known throughout California for quality animals raised with care and skill. He never bought another horse without thinking of Ranger, and he made sure to treat every animal he owned with the same love and respect he had shown his first companion. Some sacrifices were never forgotten, even as they led to blessings beyond measure. When William turned 18 and announced his intention to study law in San Francisco, Wilhelmina felt the bittersweet ache of a parent watching a child take flight. But she was also proud, so proud of the intelligent, principled young man her son had become. "You gave me the love of learning," William said as he prepared to leave. "Both of you. Papa with his determination to better himself, and you with your books and your belief in education. I will carry that with me always." After he left, Wilhelmina found herself in her empty nest sooner than expected. Marion was 16 and spent more time at the ranch than at home. Thomas was 14 and equally independent. Suddenly, she and Jackson had time together again, just the two of them, reminiscent of their early married days. "We did well," Jackson said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Our children are good people, happy and healthy and finding their own paths." "We did do well," Wilhelmina agreed. She was 41 now, Jackson 44. Not old, but no longer young either. They had both earned their gray hairs and the lines around their eyes. "Though I confess I miss the noise sometimes, the chaos of little ones." "I do not miss the chaos," Jackson said with a laugh. "But I know what you mean. The house feels too quiet now." "Perhaps we could get a dog," Wilhelmina suggested, "to fill some of the emptiness." They did get a dog, a mongrel puppy that Thomas named Buck, and who proved to be as wild and energetic as his young owner. The dog became a beloved member of the family, following Jackson to the ranch and greeting Wilhelmina when she came home from the library. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. William came home from San Francisco, now a promising young lawyer with courtship prospects of his own. Marion brought her beau, a rancher's son who had been trying to win her heart for 2 years. Thomas was 17 and talking about joining the army, much to his mother's dismay. Martha hosted the anniversary dinner at a restaurant, now run primarily by her grown nieces, but still bearing her touch. The room was filled with friends and family, with laughter and love, with toasts and stories of the past 2 decades. 20 years ago, Jackson said, standing to address the gathered crowd, I made the best decision of my life. I sold my horse to save this woman's bookshop. At the time, I told her I could walk, but she deserved to keep building. I had no idea then that what we would build together would be so much more than a shop. We built a family, a community, a legacy. He turned to Wilhelmina, his eyes suspiciously bright. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, purpose and home and love beyond measure. These 20 years have been the greatest adventure of my life. Wilhelmina stood and took his hand, facing the people who had become their extended family over the years. When Jackson walked into my shop all those years ago, I was at my lowest point. I thought I had lost everything. But he showed me that sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. His sacrifice saved my dream, but more than that, it opened my heart to the possibility of sharing that dream with someone else, of building something together that is stronger and more beautiful than anything I could have created alone. She looked at her husband, this man who had been her rock and her partner for 2 decades. I love you more today than I did 20 years ago, and I will love you more 20 years from now. Thank you for walking into my shop. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for every day since then. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Wilhelmina and Jackson kissed while their children groaned good-naturedly, and their friends whistled. It was a perfect moment, a celebration of a love that had weathered storms and celebrated joys, that had grown deeper with each passing year. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Wilhelmina found herself standing with Martha, watching Jackson tell stories to a group of their friends. You have had a good life together, Martha observed. I told you that first day that it was true love. You did, Wilhelmina agreed. And you were right. I am always right about love, Martha said with a small smile. It is my gift. More years passed, bringing grandchildren and new adventures. William married and started his own law practice in Sacramento, bringing his wife and babies to visit regularly. Marion married her rancher and settled on land adjacent to Jackson's ranch, creating a family compound of sorts. Thomas did join the army but returned after 5 years, ready to settle down and help his father with the horses. Wilhelmina expanded the library further, establishing satellite locations in smaller towns throughout the county. Her dream of bringing education to everyone became a reality, and she watched with satisfaction as literacy rates rose and children who had once been denied schooling learned to read. Jackson bred horses that were sought after throughout California and even in other states. He trained his methods to Thomas, passing on the knowledge and skill he had accumulated over decades. Together they built a business that would endure for generations. On their 30th anniversary, they returned to the creek where Jackson had proposed so many years before. They were 53 and 56 now, with grandchildren and gray hair and bodies that moved a little slower than they once had. But the love between them was as strong as ever. 30 years, Wilhelmina marveled. Sometimes I still cannot believe my good fortune. Our good fortune, Jackson corrected. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water with the same practiced motion he had used for decades. We were lucky to find each other. More than lucky, Wilhelmina said. Blessed. They stood by the water, hands clasped, thinking about everything they had shared. The births of their children and grandchildren, the growth of their businesses, the quiet moments and the dramatic ones, the laughter and occasional tears. The unwavering support they had given each other through everything life brought their way. "Do you ever regret it?" Wilhelmina asked softly. "Selling Ranger, giving up the cowboy life." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I will not lie and say I never think about it. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had kept riding, kept drifting from place to place. But regret? No. How could I regret choices that led to you, to our children, to everything we have built? Ranger was a good horse and I loved him, but you are the love of my life. Our family is my greatest achievement. And this town, this community we have helped shape, this is more meaningful than any trail I could have ridden." "I am glad," Wilhelmina said, leaning against him. "Because I cannot imagine my life without you. You saved me that day, Jackson. Not just the shop, but me. You taught me that I did not have to be alone, that accepting help and partnership was not weakness but strength." "We saved each other," Jackson said firmly. "That is what love does. It makes both people stronger." They walked back to town slowly, savoring the evening air and each other's company. The bookshop had long since closed for the day, now run primarily by a staff of dedicated employees, while Wilhelmina focused on the larger library system. But it still held a special place in her heart, this building where her dream had taken root and where she had met the man who would change her life. As they passed it, Wilhelmina stopped and looked in the window. "Do you remember the first time you came in?" she asked. "Like it was yesterday," Jackson said. "I was nervous. I had never been in a bookshop before. I was not sure someone like me belonged in a place like that. But you came in anyway." "But I came in anyway," he agreed, "because I wanted to learn, I wanted to be more than I was. And you made me feel welcome. You never looked down on me for my lack of education. You just offered to help. And you kept coming back." "Every Thursday," Jackson said with a smile. "Like clockwork. I told myself it was just about the books, but even then I think I knew it was about you. About the woman who had books and dreams in equal measure." They continued home, to the house that had grown along with their family over the years. Inside, they could hear Thomas and his wife Sarah, who had stopped by for dinner. The sound of their voices, the warmth of family, filled Wilhelmina with contentment. This was what they had built. Not just a bookshop or a ranch or a library system. They had built a life full of love and purpose and connection. They had raised children who were good people making positive contributions to the world. They had supported each other through 3 decades of marriage, never wavering in their commitment, and it had all started with a sacrifice. With a cowboy selling his horse to save a woman's shop, believing in her dream when she had almost stopped believing in it herself. More years passed, and Wilhelmina and Jackson settled into a comfortable old age. They spent their days working less and enjoying life more, taking time to travel to see their children and grandchildren, pursuing hobbies they had never had time for before. William became a respected judge in Sacramento, upholding justice with the same integrity his parents had taught him. Marion and her husband expanded their ranching operation into a thriving business. Thomas took over the horse ranch completely when Jackson finally retired, carrying on his father's legacy with skill and dedication. The library system continued to grow, now spanning multiple counties and touching thousands of lives. Wilhelmina finally stepped back from day-to-day management in her 60s, content to serve on the board and watch others carry forward the work she had started. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party attended by what seemed like half the county. People came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of their community. There were speeches and toasts, reminiscences and laughter, and more than a few tears. 40 years, Jackson said in his speech, his voice still strong at 66. 40 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. 43 years ago, I sold my horse to save her shop. Best decisions I ever made, bar none. People sometimes ask me if I miss the cowboy life, the freedom of the open trail. What I tell them is this: I found something better. I found a home. I found a purpose. I found love. And I found that true freedom is not in being able to go wherever you want, but in choosing to stay somewhere because it is where you belong. Wilhelmina, now 63 and still sharp as ever, rose to speak as well. Jackson likes to say he saved my shop, and he did. But what he really did was show me that it is okay to need people, that accepting help is not a sign of weakness, that love is worth the risk of opening your heart. He walked into my bookshop a stranger, and he left my husband, and every day in between has been a gift. The party lasted well into the night, filled with the kind of joy that comes from a life well lived and love well earned. As Wilhelmina and Jackson finally retired to their home in the early morning hours, both tired but happy, they reflected on how far they had come. 40 more years. Jackson asked, echoing his question from decades earlier. At least, Wilhelmina said with a laugh, though at our age we might be pushing it. Then we will take whatever we get, Jackson said, pulling her close. However many days we have left, I want to spend them with you. That sounds perfect to me. They lived 12 more years together, good years full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of quiet contentment and deep satisfaction with lives well lived. Jackson passed away in his sleep at 78, with Wilhelmina beside him, having lived to see his grandchildren grown and his great-grandchildren born. Wilhelmina grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing a partner of 52 years. But she also felt gratitude for every moment they had shared, every sacrifice made, every joy celebrated together. She lived another 6 years after Jackson's death, surrounded by family, continuing to support the library system she had built, telling stories about their life together to anyone who would listen. When she passed away at 81, the entire town of Downieville mourned. The library system was renamed in honor of both Wilhelmina and Jackson Turner, recognizing the partnership that had made it possible. The bookshop where they had met was preserved as a historic building, a testament to where dreams and love had converged to create something lasting. Their children ensured their legacy lived on. William's descendants became lawyers and judges, fighting for justice and education access. Marion's children and grandchildren carried on the ranching tradition, treating their animals with the same respect Jackson had shown. Thomas's family continued the horse breeding operation, known for their quality and integrity. And in Downieville, in libraries and bookshops and around family dinner tables, the story was told and retold. The story of a cowboy who sold his horse to save a woman's shop. Who said, "I can walk, but you deserve to keep building." The story of a love that grew from that sacrifice, that deepened over decades, that created a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a story about courage and kindness, about sacrifice and love, about two people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. It was a story that reminded people that sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe in someone else's dream, even at great personal cost. That true love is about partnership and support, about making each other stronger. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind that came from a life fully lived and love fully given. The kind that proved that sometimes, when you give up something you love for something you believe in, you find that you have gained far more than you lost. Jackson had walked so Wilhelmina could keep building. But what they had built together was worth more than any horse, any business, any individual dream. They had built a family, a legacy, a love story that would be remembered long after they were gone. In the end, that was their greatest achievement. Not the bookshop or the ranch or the library system, as important as those were. Their greatest achievement was the love they shared, the family they raised, the example they set of what marriage and partnership could be at their very best. They showed that sacrifice made with love is never wasted, that taking a chance on someone can change both your lives, that the best adventures are the ones you take together. And so their story ended as all good love stories should, with a life fully lived, love fully expressed, and a legacy that would endure long after the final chapter was written. The cowboy who had walked so his love could build had found that, in walking beside her, he had found everything he had ever truly needed.